We still have high prices of entry for homes, plus
You know, there is a phrase we use back in the country. It says, "Be without food, but don't be without shelter or home." You know, shelter is very important than food. You know. Yes.
There's collateral damage from the housing shortage. Record rent increases.
My name is Fazal Rabi. So yeah, I born in Afghanistan. I start to be an interpreter. Trying to help alongside the army or coalition forces. And that's why I got selected as one of the special immigrant to come here to United States, just to be safe. At least have a hope for my kids to have a bright future.
When I was 15, my mother passed away. And then a year later, at the age of 16, I entered the American foster care system. It became a challenge navigating where I could see us home. I've pulled myself out of some pretty bad spots. But one thing I couldn't get around was the fact that I needed housing. And what I was making was just not cutting it.
I got a job, and one of the team members was telling me that don't be surprised when you get your first, check, Because no matter how hard I was working, I couldn't afford sometime, working as much as you can work, like 3 jobs.
In college, I would do evening classes and then I would work during the day, Monday through Friday, and then I would do my second job, 16 hours every weekend, because I did not know where I was going to end up.
There was one time like I didn't see my son for a week with the same house, Especially that was the first 2 years. Imagine, you do whatever for your kids and you don't get to see your kids and your kids like, you can't see my dad. It was really hard.
When you think about basic human needs, food, clothing, and shelter, right? We're talking about shelter. How can a family grow and prosper if they don't have a home that they can afford in a decent neighborhood? It's foundational for family growth.
In the past several years, the situation has become more urgent than we've seen even 10 years ago.
There are so many American families that don't have enough income to afford rental housing, much less transition to home ownership. Half of the renters in this country are what we call cost burdened. They are paying more than 30% of their income for housing.
It has implications for people's lives. It has implications for where they work, whether they can afford to be in a market because they can't afford the rents there. It has implications for how their children live.
So we need to do more on the supply side. We need to find a way to build more affordable rental housing.
The low-income housing tax credit allows investors who are seeking some break on their income tax bill to invest money in housing and get credits that then will write down their tax bill. And the result is funds to build additional low-income housing.
Now I know that I can enjoy the life, being with the kids. Still working, but come home, and when I have time, we work together with them. So that's how we build this. We want to make sure that they progress in their studies, so they can have a good future, brighter future.
And so we both try and add to the supply, and then we provide more money on the demand side. On what we call the demand side, the Section 8 vouchers are the primary way to help people afford housing.
Vouchers are a way for a resident to get into an apartment that costs more than what they can afford with their 30% of budget allocated to housing.
The voucher program changes the trajectory of our futures. There definitely would have been a lot more detours, a lot more failures, a lot more uncertainty. I am currently searching for houses, but my goal is by the end of the year to be a homeowner. Without the voucher program, I can't really imagine where I would be right now.
I think it's important to build on the programs that we have. The problems are too urgent to start from scratch.
First off, I think housing is a nonpartisan issue, but I certainly believe that the bipartisan approach to solving it is what needs to happen.
I would go further and say every social goal that we want for the people of the United States, better education, better health care, more stable family environments, revolve around housing.
Because I'm just like, if you hear my story, you would change their life.
It gives people roots, gives people a foundation to start from.
A precondition for making progress on almost every social goal that we have in the country is to have a decent place to say, tonight I'm going home to rest.
On behalf of the Bipartisan Policy Center, I'd like to welcome you to today's event, Prioritizing Housing and Health to Prevent and Address Homelessness. I'm Michelle Nellenbach. I'm the Vice President for Strategic Initiatives here at the Bipartisan Policy Center. I first want to thank everyone in the audience, both here in person and tuning in online, for joining us for this important conversation on the connection between housing and health. I'd also like to thank our co-sponsors, Mayors and CEOs for U.S. Housing Investment and Kaiser Permanente, for helping us to put this event together and for sharing their expertise. To set up today's events, I'd like to start by briefly highlighting why this topic is so important. A growing number of people in this country are experiencing homelessness, but more importantly, unsheltered homelessness. And when people do not have stable housing, they are much more likely to develop health problems. For those already experiencing these problems, homelessness only serves to exacerbate them. I mean, think about that. If you don't have a home, all your other problems are made that much worse. You cannot focus on anything other than finding a place to live and rest your head, let alone your health. So ensuring that people have a safe and affordable place to live is a proven way to dramatically improve health outcomes, which is why back in 2015, BPC launched our Senior Health and Housing Task Force, where we started to explore these issues. Today, we'll hear from some top elected city officials, as well as business and community leaders, on innovative approaches for preventing homelessness and supporting affordable housing. And we'll discuss ways in which the federal government can provide support for scaling these strategies. With that in mind, I'd like to turn it over to our next speaker. Amy King is the CEO and founder of Pallet, an impressive Seattle-based company that specializes in building rapid response shelter villages that provide temporary housing for those impacted by natural disasters and homelessness. She is a member of Mayors and CEOs for U.S. Housing Investment. Pallet's innovative business model is informed by its many employees who have personally experienced homelessness, and the company has established over 80 shelter villages in 13 states since its start in 2016. Please join me in welcoming Ms. King to the stage.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Amy King, and I'm the founder and CEO of Pallet. As mentioned, we have the privilege of sheltering and housing thousands of people across the country who are currently experiencing homelessness. And the really important part of what we do is being able to see people then move on. So what we do is transitional housing, connecting people to permanent solutions that then make sense for them in the long term. And my goal is to eventually work myself out of a job. It would be great if I was no longer needed because we had enough housing for everyone. But in the interim, we don't believe that the streets of America should be the waiting room for housing. And we want people to be stabilized and connected with services. And what we've seen is that stability has allowed people to overcome challenges related to their health care, both mental and physical health. And so we believe housing is health care and should be considered as such. And we're really excited to be part of this conversation today. So before I introduce the next speaker, I want to say some thank yous as well. I want to start by thanking the Bipartisan Policy Center. You guys are so great for hosting and for leadership, convening leaders and thought leaders to talk about important issues. So thank you so much for having us today. Eve O'Toole, our coalition manager for mayors and CEOs for U.S. housing investment, thank you so much for all you do to bring leaders together. As a business leader, I can't do what I need to do in the world without mayors and the support that they bring. They know their communities the best. They know what they need. They know how to advocate for those communities. And it helps me to have their back and hopefully them to have mine. So as we work together, we can actually solve this problem. Really important. And I'm so grateful for the bipartisan nature of this group. This is the only bipartisan coalition that is addressing this very important issue. This is a bipartisan issue. People need housing. So thank you so much, Eve, for convening everyone and making this a reality. Mayor Giles of Mesa, Arizona, and Mayor Steinberg of Sacramento, California, for co-chairing the mayors and CEOs, such an important thing. Thank you so much for your leadership and the way you take care compassionately of your communities. You guys have set a real standard for everyone to follow. Clarence Anthony, CEO and Executive Director of NLC and former mayor of South Bay, Florida. Thank you so much for NLC's partnership on this important topic. So important for us to work together as cities. Again, cities know what their constituents need. Mayors know what their constituents need, and I really appreciate the way that you convene everyone, bring them together to talk about these important social issues and bring justice to them. So thank you for your tireless work there. At Palette, we're extremely grateful for our own partnership with NLC. And as a capstone partner, we had the privilege of partnering with Mayor Williams, who's also here, of Huntington, West Virginia, to create and implement their new crisis intervention team. This was a beautiful intervention program that highlights the efficacy of public-private partnerships to address the public health crisis of substance use disorder and its impacts on our communities. So thank you, Mayor Williams, for letting us join you in that. We believe, as I said, that housing is healthcare, and without stable access to housing, health and public safety crises will continue to grow. They are growing now at rapid rates, and we must come together and use these public-private partnerships to put a stop to this. People are dying at rapid rates. We must first house and stabilize our most vulnerable citizens in order to adequately address their trauma and help them move to rehabilitation and ultimately independence. Along those lines, we recognize the stark importance of alignment and partnership, as I've mentioned, between public officials, healthcare and housing agencies, service organizations, and voices of lived experience, something that we very highly value and believe has to be at the table when we talk about these crises. Without all those stakeholders contributing to solutions, we cannot and will not solve this crisis in our lifetime. But at Palette, we do believe that ending homelessness is achievable in our lifetime. And we believe all human lives have value and all people deserve access to safe and dignified housing. And with all that in mind, now it is my very distinct privilege to introduce our next speaker, someone who has spent much of his career serving the public and bridging the gap between public and private sectors as it relates to public health and safety. Dr. Bashara Shukair oversees Kaiser Permanente's efforts to address the social health of 12.7 million members and Kaiser's work to improve conditions for health and equity for all 68 million people living in the communities they serve. This includes the development of the nation's largest social health network, integrated with Kaiser Permanente's healthcare services, the management of the organization's comprehensive community health portfolio, and the care of over 1 million Kaiser Permanente Medicaid members. In 2021, Dr. Shukair joined the National COVID-19 Response Team, serving as the White House National COVID-19 Vaccinations Coordinator. Kind of a big deal. Thank you for that. He returned to Kaiser Permanente in 2022 and continues to bring attention to the health and equity implications of the major public health challenges we face today, from housing instability, homelessness, and food insecurity to gun violence and climate change. Please welcome Dr. Shuker.
All right. Good afternoon, and thank you, Amy. And it's so good to be here with everybody. This is the third event on Housing for Health that we've been hosting at Kaiser Permanente. The first event was back in Colorado, where we focused on the importance of strengthening the homeless response systems, and we've worked with Community Solutions that's been rolling out the Built for Zero program in about 104 communities across the country, where we've seen reduction in homelessness, significant reduction in about 40 plus of those communities. The second event took us to Atlanta, where we focused on preservation. How do we make sure that we're preserving affordable housing across the country? And we've partnered with Enterprise Community Solutions on their Preservation Next effort. Today's focus here in DC with the mayors and CEOs for U.S. housing investment, with the Bipartisan Policy Center, is truly focusing about prevention. What do we do to make sure that we're preventing people from being evicted? Look, I'm a family physician, and I've always believed it's so much better to prevent things from happening rather than just treating things after they happen. And as an organization, we've been believing strongly about preventing eviction for our own members as well as folks in our communities. Back in 2021, we've launched a partnership with a medical legal partnership of particular focus on working with folks, working with people on the verge of getting evicted, and provide them with the legal support that they need so that we can prevent this eviction. This medical legal partnership that we've started back in 2021, it already prevented about 10,000 evictions across our footprint. And for our own Kaiser Permanente members, about 1,600 members were able to benefit from the service. And by embedding legal advisors in the care delivery team, so that when we think or when we know one of our members is at the risk of eviction, we right on the spot be able to provide them with that legal advice and support to be able to prevent them from ending up on the street. So we're so thrilled about this effort. We're actually doubling down on that, and we're making an additional commitment to expand to more cities in our footprint. We're going to be in Sacramento and Vallejo and LA and Denver and Portland and many other places to really be able to support our members and the communities in that critical, important effort of prevention. So prevention is really an important part. And just like Amy said, mayors know all about prevention. I worked in local government for 5 years as the health commissioner for the city of Chicago, and I know how critical the role of mayors is in everything that touches health, everything that touches the lives of people in those communities. So that's why we're so thrilled about our partnership with the U.S., with the mayors and CEOs for U.S. housing investment. And that's why I'm extremely excited to welcome our 5 mayors to join me for this next event. So we're going to have in the room here with us Mayor Steinberg, the co-chair, Mayor Steve Williams, and Mayor Rex Richardson, who are going to be joining me right here. And then live on the screen, we have Mayor John Giles and Mayor Karen Go, who's going to be joining us as well. So welcome. Okay. All right, so we are so thrilled to have you all here in person, mayors, and the 2 mayors on the screen. And for the next 40 minutes or so, we're just gonna hear from mayors about the type of work they've been engaged in when it comes to preventing and supporting homelessness solutions across the country in their cities. So we'll start with in your cities right now. And I'll start with you, Mayor Giles, as the co-chair of the coalition here. What are some of the programs that you're doing to prevent homelessness and support chronic homelessness effort in Mesa, Arizona? We'll start with you, Mayor Giles.
Well, thank you very much. And again, it's a Thank you for allowing me to appear virtually. I was with the gentleman on your stage last night at dinner, and so they're probably wondering what the heck, what happened to Giles. But I had to come home for a city event this morning, so I appreciate your accommodating me this way. When I first became mayor about 9 years ago, I remember very intentionally when I was asked to speak on this topic, saying homelessness is an issue in Mesa, Arizona, because I felt like I really needed to help raise awareness of it and help people elevate the issue in our community. I no longer feel like I need to say that because I think in most people's minds they've come to realize that homelessness is not an issue; it's the issue in our communities, particularly as we travel and around and see in Washington D.C. yesterday in the public right of way. I saw tents and that's a common sight in a lot of our communities. So we in Mesa have tried to run to the front of this problem as quickly as we can. Prior to the pandemic, we became painfully aware that we were in our city court system prosecuting people for the crime of being poor, for vagrancy and trespass and issues in urban camping. We were spending a lot of time and energy in our community locking people up and paying jail fees, and it was a treadmill. It was the same people over and over again. So several years ago, we started a community court program, and this is gives our public safety folks the opportunity to engage in providing services. And when they cite people for those issues into the community court system, it's a wraparound services environment and we've seen some great success by working with people rather than in an adversarial, punitive way. During the pandemic, we were very blessed, like all the cities that are present, to receive some generous federal funding, and we used our funding to initiate an off the streets program. So for the last 3 years, we've rented about 80 rooms a night in a local motel. That's allowed us to enforce our urban camping rules and to keep and to provide emergency shelter. We're at our next city council meeting, hopefully we'll finalize the purchase of a motel, so we're no longer renting, but rather owning a facility so that in perpetuity, we're going to be able to have this successful program. We've additionally added a homeless solutions staff and a hotline for the public to engage, and we've reached out to our faith and NGO communities in a more significant way, organizing a quote-unquote Together Mesa program, where we can provide opportunities for service for the great people in our community that want to engage on this. So I don't mean to suggest that we've got this figured out. We're far from it, but I am pleased to say that in our community, the issue is at the top of our agenda. And we're anxious to try to make some meaningful progress.
Thank you, Mayor. The community court, the practical examples that you're giving are really great to share with everyone here. Mayor Steinberg, I had the opportunity to work with you for years now on this particular issue. What examples would you like to highlight from Sacramento?
Thank you, Dr. Shakir. First of all, wonderful to be with all of you. Thank you to the Bipartisan Policy Center, Kaiser Permanente, I've worked very closely with, and the mayors and CEOs for affordable housing. Thank you, Eve. This is a true match of bipartisan thinking. And I guess I just want to make one brief political statement, and then I'm going to answer your question, which is that when it comes to the polarized issue of homelessness, avoid the polar arguments, because this has become really divisive. There are those who say it's all about housing. There are those who say, no, it's all about mental health and substance abuse. No, people don't want help. People want help, it's just not available. Well, as with any extreme statement, there's truth in the middle here. The fact of the matter is we have a problem of systemic poverty, really, because people have always lived with severe mental health and substance abuse issues, but they've held on. And now the society, economically and otherwise, has gotten so fragile that people are becoming unsheltered and living with those conditions. West Virginia has a higher substance abuse rate than California, but a lower homeless rate. So it can't just all be about substance abuse and mental health. Okay, thank you. Phew. Got that off my chest. Thanks. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
So
I have to tell you, as a physician who spent most of my clinical career taking care of people experiencing homelessness, what you're saying is totally resonate with me, because I've seen people experiencing homelessness with a full spectrum of issues, and it's not just one
it's
issue.
not just
that
one
solves.
thing.
There's absolutely,
Okay, so now I'm going
right.
to briefly
All
answer
right.
the question. So,
Sacramento.
in Sacramento, we are, and it's maybe not unique about California, but we are a city and we have counties, which are the Health and Human Services subdivisions of the state of California. And we don't have a public health department. We don't fund mental health or substance abuse. And so as a city, we have gone from less than 100 temporary beds a night to over 1,200 a night since I became mayor. We have formed a new department of outreach, a department of community response. And maybe the most significant thing we have done, in addition to add capacity, is we have forged through a lot of pain a legally binding partnership agreement with our county so that we are working together to and committed legally to one another to have multiple multidisciplinary outreach teams out on the streets, including trained mental health workers and the city outreach workers, to really work with people to get them indoors and inside with the help that they need. And then the county is bound to a standard that says they will do whatever it takes, including adding as many wraparound service slots as are necessary with the full mental health and housing supports as needed to get people off the streets. And so it's for those of you who are interested in a way to govern between jurisdictions that have separate responsibilities, this might help. And it is helping us. But it's all in the implementation, because a law is only as good as the spirit by which it is implemented. And on that score, we've got a long, long way to go to make sure that the systems are actually working together so that we are getting people off the street. Last thing, in the state now, we have new policies that are helping us. We've got Governor Newsom has taken on mental health and substance abuse like no governor in my memory, and I've been involved in this for 30 plus years. Billions of dollars for mental health and substance abuse, and some laws that say at the end of the continuum of care, after we've offered people everything imaginable and they still won't take it because of the nature of their illness, that we can in fact get them into care and treatment. And so there's more hope, in addition to the federal Medicaid reform, known as CalAIM, that allows us to spend those Medicaid dollars on housing and other supports. We actually think we have a foundation for something more significant. Last thing, for every person we get off the street, 3 more people become homeless. And so if it is not about prevention, early intervention, and more tenant support and more federal assistance for aid to people who are at risk of losing their homes, then we're missing a major piece of it.
And I'm going to come back to that piece because that's such an important part. But Mayor Go, you want to share with us a little bit about your perspective from Bakersfield?
Well, thank you very much. Amy opened up saying housing is healthcare. Housing is healthcare, but we have to effectively address the behavioral health challenges that we face for housing solutions to be effective. And you heard Mayor Steinberg talk about California taking the major steps to house those with mental health and to address this issue. California has only 12% of the nation's total population, but we have 50% of the nation's unsheltered residents. And for decades, our state has not used its funding to build the housing and to build the infrastructure necessary to provide the community care. At this point, our cities are triaging the crisis as we get at the major causes of homelessness, mental health, substance abuse, and the availability of affordable housing. So in Bakersfield, we have nearly tripled our shelter beds. We've added caseworkers, increased street outreach, all at a massive, massive scale. But we still see people on our streets decomposing before our very eyes. In our point in time count, we had more sheltered this year and in the last year, homeless persons than we had unsheltered. But in terms of chronic homelessness, that would be persons who've experienced homelessness for at least a year or repeatedly over the last 3 years while living with a disability. There's not a one-size-fits-all solution. And that's what Mayor Steinberg was alluding to. There are many different avenues. Housing First tells us that permanent supportive housing is the ideal placement for chronic homeless persons. But our housing authority and others who operate permanent supportive housing tell us it's not so black and white. If the permanent supportive housing facility only has peer support case management, then it could fail individuals. But if the permanent supportive housing has peer support layered with on-site mental health and medical services, then the outcomes for success substantially increase. So Bakersfield continues to build more supportive housing units as we aim to provide clinical case management. In Bakersfield, we're seeing folks with serious mental health, with serious substance abuse challenges cycle in and out of our shelters and affordable housing without meaningful intervention. And we have to stop that cycle. I'll talk about some of our innovative solutions that we're implementing in our coming questions. In March 2020, Bakersfield and our community actually were certified for functional zero for chronic homelessness with 3 or fewer people experiencing homelessness. That's been a challenge to sustain. We've made substantial changes to our processes. However, we weren't prepared for a vacancy rate of 1% and the drastic increase of rents almost overnight during COVID. Some like to argue that facing just a housing crisis or it's just a mental health crisis, it's not an either or, it's both. And our state's inability to effectively address mental health and substance abuse clogs our safety nets. Our shelters in Bakersfield will be at or near capacity tonight. That means that if you have fallen on hard times, there's no room in the inn. We have to keep working together on both the healthcare, the behavioral healthcare, and the housing solutions.
Thank you, Mayor. And obviously, we were very closely working with Community Solutions, and we celebrated the moment you got to functional zero for chronic homelessness. And just exactly like you said, it takes a lot of time and energy and effort to keep it at that functional zero. And I'm looking forward to our next part of the panel to talk about some of the strategies on prevention. Mayor Williams, Huntington, West Virginia, what's the perspective from your world?
As I outline what we are experiencing, and I hear what they're saying, it appears that we don't have a problem. But there's an old joke. You know the difference between major surgery and minor surgery? Major surgery is when I'm having it, minor surgery is when you're having it. So is it a major issue in any of these cities? Absolutely. And it's a major issue in every neighborhood because it's out that person's back door. And then they're calling us, Mayor, get this done. Now, I've been mayor for 11 years now. When I first became mayor, we had a significant homeless problem. Encampments developing and all. We needed to do something about that. And I learned a lesson real early. You could approach it with all the compassion in your heart. When you start drawing individuals together to say, we have to address this, they're not too terribly happy because they don't necessarily trust us. When I brought the meeting together, now I don't know that you all are going to get this analogy given that I'm from West Virginia and Appalachia, but I'll try it out. When these folks came around my table, they weren't real happy to be there. They looked like they'd been weaned on a pickle. They were not happy. They were sitting there with their arms folded, eyebrows shot up, and just kind of pursed lips. Now you understand what the pickle thing is? Until they had me start talking about what we're trying to do. Homelessness is not a crime. How many of us, and more than any of us will be willing to admit here, how many of us have been a paycheck away from losing our home? The reality is that it could be any of us, but by the grace of God. So when I drew them together, and then they started to understand where my heart was and what we were trying to do, you'd see the legs unfold, the arms start to come down, and they started leaning in. We didn't solve the problem. Now, this is back in 2014. We didn't solve the problem, but we got a community together to start acting on it. What I like to say is we started to have universal collaboration. We talk about universal health care and everything, universal collaboration, where everybody has an assignment. Everyone has a responsibility to try to help lift someone else up. And what we started doing at the time, we had with these encampments, we went to these folks and said, you can't be living here. In 2 weeks, we're going to need to move you, and we're going to help you. The difference between 2014 and now 23 is that everyone who was wanting to fund housing, we found a house for them. We found a shelter for them. Now, since 2019, our homelessness has increased by 43%. A lot of it deals with mental health issues and substance use, and usually those are together. That's why when we had this partnership with Pallet, and God love you for it, you just helped us understand this is how you draw other people together. So frankly, if the state and federal government wants to help us, they need to make sure that you're talking to mayors and talking to folks locally. We have the knowledge how to do this. We just don't have the capacity. And that's why we're here talking.
Right. Thank you. Thank you, Mayor. Mayor Richardson, you want to give us a point of view from Long Beach?
Sure. So I'm Rex Richardson. I'm a new mayor. I've been mayor for 10 months. And, I was on the city council for 8 years, had no kids when I started. I have an 8-year-old, 6-year-old now, and I ran for mayor because I want my children to have a bright future in our city. But it was very, very clear and apparent during the course of the campaign that on all sides of parties and all of that, this was the most significant issue facing our city. Whether you're a homeowner and you're concerned about the quality of life, or you're a renter, and we're 61% renters in our city, and you're concerned about keeping a roof over your head. This is where the zeitgeist is. This is where the progress needs to be made. Long Beach, we're a city that is sort of the right size to be an incubator, a laboratory. 500,000 residents, around the same size as Sacramento, but we're unique. We're a public health jurisdiction. We're one of only 3 jurisdictions in the entire state of California that has a public health department. It's one of the oldest public health departments and one of the largest that any city has in the state. And so that gives us a lot of flexibility and autonomy, our own continuum of care, our own housing authority that allows us to develop boutique programs and to innovate. And coming into office, we were dealing with a crisis on multiple fronts. I'm talking about COVID-19, economic catastrophe, forcing people out of their homes, substance use crisis manifesting on our streets, mental health challenges that we weren't equipped with because mental health is controlled by counties and states, despite the fact I have my own public health department, right? And so coming in, how did that show up? That showed up with a 62% increase in homelessness between 2020 and 2022 when I took office. And so we needed to show up and bring that spirit of unity that we had during the pandemic, everyone contributing and saying this is our single greatest focus. And so coming into office the very first week, I declared a state of emergency, locked arms with Mayor Bass and with the county, and we said this is going to be our top priority. Again, we're independent. We're a different structure than those other cities, so it allowed us to move faster. We developed partnerships, groups like the Big City Mayors, a new group called LA County Affordable Housing Solutions Agency to focus on prevention and solutions. We developed new models for outreach that took our sort of central case intake center and put it on wheels and took it out to the community. We expanded shelter capacity, used the provisions within the Declaration of Emergency to move faster on procurement, buying warehouses to deploy emergency shelters, bringing in contractors to convert hotels. The goal was to build our capacity. We've had this capacity for a long time, but it was insufficient for what we were dealing with. So we needed to plus it up to allow us to be able to manage the crisis to a greater extent. Now, we've been clear with people that we're a public health jurisdiction. We believe in upstream. We believe in prevention. We believe in housing. We believe that, while other jurisdictions make excuses for housing production, we believe in housing. We want to build it, and we want it to be affordable for our residents to live in it. But in order to do that, we have to address this crisis of street homelessness in our communities today. And so I'll pause because I know we're kind of running late, but I want to get into the conversation. I will just say that Long Beach is big enough. We're small enough to move quickly and be nimble, but we're big enough that when we get it right, it scales. Yep. And so we're sort of a laboratory for innovation as it relates to civic challenges in Long Beach.
Thank you. This is wonderful. Okay, so the second half of this panel, I'm going to shift us to talk about how we're thinking about stabilizing low-income tenants in their homes. When we know folks are on the verge of homelessness, what type of programs, what type of policies we need to be thinking about to prevent them from ending up homeless or ending up on the streets. And Mayor Go, I'm going to just start with you here. So how you've been thinking about prevention per se?
In Bakersfield, unfortunately, just as Mayor Steinberg was saying, for every 6 individuals we house, 10 become homeless. We have to stop the inflow. The median rent in Bakersfield is now $1,800, and we've seen our multifamily vacancy rate hit 1%. For someone on fixed income, it's a very perilous time. In our city, we've developed a housing trust fund, and we're investing general fund dollars in providing gap funding for affordable housing developments. The council just voted to start the process of developing a land trust, a nonprofit organization where we can steward the land and property for the benefit of our low income and moderate income community members. And this year, we've also invested money in an eviction protection program. Affordable and market rate housing production is the solution. And we're glad that Bakersfield is a leader in housing production in the state, but we still can't build fast enough to meet the need. And here's the challenge. Cost and time for developers keeps increasing with additional state regulations and requirements. We've checked the boxes, doing all the right things in investing in programs for protection, but we have to find a way to remove barriers to building all types of housing.
Steinberg, how are you approaching prevention?
So, a couple of things. When we received our share of the federal ARPA money, one-time money, including money for rental assistance for tenants at risk, we had about 11,000 families apply for that assistance, and the money allowed us to help about half of those families, leaving another half without the assistance because we ran out of the money, which to me speaks to the importance of a federal role in housing policy. I mean, I say one of the tragic days of the last couple of years that barely was noticed was when Build Back Better had $350 billion for housing, federal housing strategy, and then in a day, it went away. We need that sort of help, right? To be able to offer all 11,000 families in my city the rental assistance they need. The second thing for me that is so important is getting back to Amy King's role here and the role of manufactured housing, transitional housing, and even permanent housing in our country. Why is it that despite these great innovations, that it is still a struggle to finance these projects through the stacked financing model of federal tax credits and all the things you go through to build a conventional supportive housing or affordable housing project? And you've got regulatory and zoning issues and all kinds of other obstacles. But really, we have to, if we're going to meet the need, even on the transitional side, we're going to have a manufactured housing revolution in this country. Because if we don't, we're never going to build conventional apartments fast enough, or conventional homes fast enough, or cost efficient enough to be able to meet the need. I mean, the cost of subsidizing a single apartment in California, in some parts of the state, is $1 million or less. We have a math problem here. The numbers don't add up. And so this and products like Pallet are a big part of the solution. We have to build them to scale and build them into our finance systems so that we're doing more of this.
Thank you. Mayor Williams, prevention from your perspective?
We work with the Housing Authority, and constantly working on creating affordable housing. We have a partner now that we developed over the last year or so to help us do some other things. And one thing that you learn is that in order to do business with someone, you need to have someone who you can trust. Well, Amy King's operation at Pallet, I mean, they helped us be able to address how to deal with individuals who were fighting mental illness and substance use disorder, and how we could de-escalate matters along those lines. But the reality is that I've got 176 new units that are low affordable housing units being built, but it's going to take a couple of years for them to be built. I've got from in the Housing Authority properties, because of substance use disorder and methamphetamines and everything, 53 units have been torn up, and we're having to get those fixed. So in the meantime, that's where Pallet comes in to be able to identify. But there's something even more fundamental than this, where there are individuals that are on the verge of becoming unsheltered. What is causing that? Yes, you have to have a continuum of care to make sure that we're providing the necessary wraparound services so that they can have that support. Fortunately, we've got a university, a medical school, and 2 big hospitals that are there. We are the medical center for the region. The problem in rural areas, the rural areas don't have these support systems, and you know where they come? To the so-called population centers. And that's where the growth starts to occur. But there's one other thing, Mayor, that you were mentioning, of all of the investment and infrastructure investment and such that is coming into the nation right now. We've got more infrastructure dollars coming into our community than ever, and I'm not taking a big right or left turn here. Here's the key, is that if we're building water systems and broadband systems and upgrading sanitary plants and these, I don't want to hire people from Georgia and Alabama and Texas to come into Huntington, because I've got folks right there that need to learn and be trained as to how to be able to fill these jobs. So we have the capacity right now, but we've got to make dadgum sure that we have the training for those individuals to be. See, I'm trying to keep it clean.
Yeah.
You know,
I feel like my vocabulary is going to get much better after this session.
if you get me to say "bless your heart," then we're really going to make some headway.
Thank you, Mayor Giles. I'd love to hear your perspective in kind of some of the programs or policies in Mesa, Arizona to support low-income tenants, people on the brink of homelessness. What's your portfolio of solutions here?
Well, I grew up in Arizona, and one of the things I learned is that if I ever want to see the future, all I have to do is just drive 6 hours to the west and go to Southern California. And whatever is happening in Southern California, 6 months or a year from now is what we'll be experiencing in Arizona. So we look to. I've been writing voracious notes this morning, listening to my colleagues from Bakersfield and Long Beach and Sacramento. We have a lot to learn from them. And I compliment them for their compassion and their commitment to this issue. Looking backwards, on this issue, I mean, the pandemic was horrible. We lost 1 million people. I wouldn't wish it on my worst nightmare. I'm on my worst enemy, rather. But there are some positive things that happened during the pandemic, and that was this additional funding that we had. Looking backwards, we did a great job in eviction prevention, partly because of the moratorium, but also my city distributed over $65 million during the pandemic for rental assistance and utility assistance. And so our fear is, what now? Going forward, we're kind of back to where we were before, which is reliance on nonprofits and some public money, and just kind of sending people on a treadmill, call this number, go stand in this line, and in the meantime, last month in Maricopa County, there were over 7,800 eviction filings. The Phoenix area has the highest housing inflation rate of anywhere in the country. So there's plenty of reasons to be very pessimistic, from where I'm sitting, I'm afraid. And so going forward, our hope is we've made a plan. We have a strategic plan for how we're going to do this. It includes emergency services, emergency housing, transitional housing, affordable housing, and putting people on the continuum and hopefully progressing them through that system. We are, in our area, we own all the utilities. So we are in a good position to provide rental assistance for utilities and lighten that burden, to some extent on our low-income residents. But again, I'm going to be probably visiting California a lot and taking a lot of notes because we are very concerned. We think we have a plan. We're starting to implement it. When we drew up this plan, we didn't have any transitional housing. So last month, our city partnered with some nonprofits to build some studio apartments for those who are successful in the emergency housing to move on. But we're wrestling with this in a mighty way right now, and hoping to learn a lot from those who have gone before us.
Thank you, Mayor. Mayor Richardson, I'm gonna come to you here also for your perspective on prevention. But before I'll give you the floor, I think we're gonna get maybe a few minutes at the end. I'm gonna ask each mayor, if you have a magic wand of things you need from the federal government to help with homeless prevention, what would that be? So just think about that. It'll be 30-second, probably rapid fire there. But Mayor Richardson, prevention.
I'm going to tack that on at the end of this response. So you
okay, fine.
All right.
So you're giving 10 seconds, extra seconds for each one of the other mayors. So go ahead.
All right. So, okay. So I know what it's like to be housing insecure. We moved around a lot growing up. I went to 14 public schools across 5 states. And I remember the difference between when my mother was a union welder on the assembly line at General Motors and when she worked at Arby's for minimum wage. It manifests differently. And so this challenge of prevention, you have to talk about poverty and wages. So we, are voting in March of this year to raise the wage on healthcare workers and on hospitality workers, given we're a big tourism city. The state of California has a rent cap, 5%. Plus CPI rent cap. That is the control on the rent statewide. And I think having statewide regulation allows for the market to respond. The state of California is raising the wage to $20 an hour for fast food workers. And then on a local standpoint, there are policies that you can do. Just cause for eviction protects tenants from frivolous evictions. There needs to be a reason for this. And there are loopholes around substantial remodels and things like that, but we put restrictions on that. We require relocation payments if you need to vacate that unit, right? During the pandemic, the rental assistance has been something we did 71 million in rental assistance, 3 million utility assistance, but that was finite. Those funds are gone. So what are the things that we can do now to help targeted vulnerable communities? Like we're piloting a program called shallow subsidy. So these are seniors where you can give just a little bit of money to help offset rent increases for them when you have a targeted, smaller amount of money. We have a right to counsel program that helps, provide legal assistance if you find yourself in an eviction proceeding. All those things help protect and keep people in their homes. Now, what I would also say is, as we sort of move forward, I'm going to answer my question about like what would we want from the federal government. Of course, we want money, right? That's the first thing. Like when we got emergency housing vouchers, we jumped on the phone with landlords and got them to take the vouchers. When we have the resources, we can deploy them. This is the first time we've gotten 100% lease up. We're the first city in the state of California to have 100% lease up on your emergency vouchers because we were able to rally. Mayor Steinberg has a point about manufactured homes. You have accessory dwelling units right now in California where cities are deploying ADUs. We have the highest ADU adoption per capita of any state in California. Well, why aren't we layering together your pre-designed ADU standards approved by your city with your housing choice vouchers that are hard to lease up and say, we have a studio, we will give you financing to put a prefabricated ADU in grandma's backyard who has the space. Grandma now gets a voucher with additional income. Why aren't we layering these programs together? So we have a pilot to do that very thing in Long Beach with the hopes that if it works, it unlocks state and federal dollars to be able to subsidize those units because they're cheaper and there's space to deploy them in backyards. Last thing I'll say to the federal government is, and I have to say this, I have to represent my generation, people can't buy homes anymore. And I was able to buy a home at 25. And that was only because of two federal programs, FHA and President Obama had a first-time home buyer tax credit of $8,000 when he was elected in 2009. Those two together allowed me to have the down payment and the financing to be able to buy a home in 2009 when I was 25. Today, FHA, 3.5 down is still a whole lot of money. You have a mortgage insurance and you have a very high payment that a 25-year-old today can't do it. So they're buying first homes at 45 now. That's less time to build wealth while you're saddled with student debt. If the federal government really wants to help people not live in a perpetual state of poverty, we have to bring a national effort around home ownership again. Let's get young people, people of color, college students on track to buy homes. Let's fund silent second mortgages. Let's fund, down payment assistance to help young people be able to live in their communities and buy their communities. So that's the biggest thing that I would love to see out of the federal government.
All right, great. Wow. All right, Mayor Go, what's your one thing that you'd want the federal government to do to help with homeless prevention?
The one thing we need the federal government to help us with aftercare. We need to be better about funding aftercare. In the city of Bakersfield, we measure success by the number of individuals that move from our shelters into permanent housing. But not all vouchers are equal. Some provide the aftercare wraparound services and some don't. We really need to make sure that persons placed into permanent housing get the clinical case management services and the care that they need so they don't cycle back onto the streets. One size does not fit all. We have this complex continuum of care. Let's continue to seek and be open to bold ideas.
Thank you. Mayor Williams.
100,000 behavioral health technicians placed in the marketplace, then they can provide the support to those who are needing it.
Wonderful. Mayor Steinberg, as the co-chair of the mayors and CEOs for housing investment.
With -6 seconds left.
Yeah.
So here's one that will not happen for a generation, but seeds must be planted. Young people, children have a legal right to a free public education. There needs to be a constitutional amendment that provides a legal right to housing for all Americans. For as long as housing is purely an economic commodity, without any form of a right, those who can afford it are going to have it, and those who are lucky enough to win the supportive housing lottery are going to get it. Everybody else, you're on your own. That's one. More practically, and Mayor Williams said it, housing must become a federal infrastructure priority. That's why the bipartisan mayors and CEOs is so important. It's every bit as important as transportation, water, and everything else that we do. And that $350 billion can't be removed without a day's notice the next time there's a big infrastructure package.
All right. Mayor Giles, we're at -1 minute, 15 seconds. You get the final word.
Okay, very quickly, my one thing that I haven't heard mentioned yet is we all know that there's a cap on how we can spend our HUD financing, and there's only a certain amount that can be spent on programming. During the pandemic, that was lifted because of the emergency situation. I think again, a lesson we learned from the pandemic is that I get why we want to see federal money used for capital projects, but that formula does need to be adjusted to allow us in these difficult circumstances to use more of that money for programming. The other one thing would be I appreciate President Biden's emphasis on mental health. I'm sure during the program today you're going to hear about that. Certainly endorse that, and that would be my other one thing.
All right. Well, thank you all. Please let me, let's give a hand to these wonderful mayors. All right.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our event. I want to thank Bashara and our mayors again for a wonderful and lively conversation, for being so thoughtful and considerate in all the ways that they're trying to address this issue. Now we're going to continue with our program. I am John Vu, Vice President of Strategy for Community Health at Kaiser Permanente. And for many years now, Kaiser Permanente has had led efforts to address and prevent homelessness and preserve affordable housing in our communities. We've done this through investments, shaping policy, and catalyzing innovations through partnerships. We know that we also need to change hearts and minds, and that win the public perception battle around drivers and root causes of homelessness and affordable housing. So one way is we thought through the power of film. In sort of an unconventional way for a health system, we decided in December of 2020 to fund the first season of a documentary series called The Way Home, a short-form documentary series produced by KTF Films and Bread and Butter Films. The series seeks to humanize the homelessness crisis through personal stories, documenting the lives of people experiencing homelessness that are often overlooked, and lifting up promising solutions to end homelessness that we're seeing across the country, from Virginia to California and all parts in between. We know that storytelling drives change. Documentaries like The Way Home help move the needle to vulnerable communities, catalyze policies, and do hopefully change hearts and minds. The series aims to understand, spark dialogue, illuminate root causes, and promising solutions to homelessness crisis across the country. I am proud to announce that after 2 seasons of this, today we are releasing season 3 of The Way Home. Season 3 focuses on effective solutions for ending homelessness, both new and more established strategies. Each approach has successfully helped people secure stable homes and offers a pathway toward ending the crisis nationally. The films debuted on YouTube today and are free and available for everyone. And what you're about to see, we're going to show a 3-minute trailer for season 3.
Homelessness is deeply entrenched in our public landscape. It's deeply entrenched in our communities, and it's been a crisis decades in the making.
There's a lot of pressure on our local officials and government to figure out how to solve this really incredibly complex challenge.
Young people who experience homelessness as young people are highly likely to experience homelessness as adults.
There's no one way to solve homelessness. It starts long before an individual ends up in a tent on the street.
I was going through a domestic violence issue.
I was very sick, ill with diabetes, high blood pressure. I never thought that I was going to be homeless.
I don't understand how I got to that point.
A lot of folks are pretty close to homelessness. And when housing is more expensive, it's just easier to find yourself without it.
You cannot look at homelessness in this country without looking at racism. And it is a domino effect.
The racial disproportionalities, particularly Black folks, Indigenous folks, whose story really doesn't get told enough.
Our first time in a homeless shelter, my kids were 7, 9, and 12. It was too much.
We need to see the privilege of working with these individuals.
Each time you pick up the phone, you really don't know what's on the other end of it, right? If someone's calling for diversion services, they're in a crisis.
If you have people that have been through the system putting their ideas into it, then you can really figure out what people like and don't like and what doesn't work.
We all win when our communities thrive. We all win when every child in this country is brought up in a safe, affordable home.
Hi, look at your place. I'm so grateful. I don't take none of it for granted.
Oh my goodness. It feels really good in here. I believe in that.
For me, having been in foster care and been homeless myself, to see people that want to change the stigmas around these issues, it's beautiful.
Thank you so much. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you. We hope you're able to check that out. Each episode is about 10 to 12 minutes, short films that hopefully bring the hope and some of this humanity back. And like I said, you can find them on YouTube now. You can also go to thewayhomedoc.com. All seasons are free for the first time out of a paywall, and I encourage you all to watch it with family, friends, and colleagues. We also designed a toolkit to help community organizations reflect on the series and guide viewers through a meaningful discussion of the films. We'll be sending out that toolkit after the event today, so look out for it in your emails if you've registered for this event. And we hope you can use the films and the toolkit to provide an opportunity for conversation and hopefully action. So thank you for watching, and hopefully you're able to share that. So now we're going to move on to the next segment. We had a very lively discussion with the mayors. You saw many issues come out even in that little short clip of the film series. Now we're going to bring even more experts on to talk about how they're confronting this issue day to day and what we're trying to do at a systemic level in addition to sort of on the ground level. So I want to invite and introduce up Clarence E. Anthony, who will be moderating this next panel. Clarence Anthony is CEO and Executive Director of the National League of Cities, the largest and oldest organization representing America's cities, towns, and villages and their leaders. Clarence, thank you.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to ask my panel to come up because you are today in the presence of some experts who's really going to help us not just to talk about the issue and the challenge we're having with homelessness in our cities, towns, and villages all over America, but also give us some answers that they've seen, or some ideas or some models that we need to think about. As you know, you've heard from the city leaders earlier, and our city leaders are calling our office at the National League of Cities every day because they want to solve this issue, want to be a part of solving the issue of homelessness. But it's also personal. I don't think a lot of folks think about the notion that oftentimes in the grocery store, at church, at community meetings, residents come up and ask the question, why aren't you doing your job? As if they don't care, as if they don't want to do their job. And they really do want to do their job. Nobody wants to see anybody in their city, in their community, in their neighborhood that don't have a place to stay at night. So I wanted to put that out there because I do think it's important to know that it's on the minds of every city leader in America. The one thing we recognize is that we can't do it alone. I mean, it's going to take the private sector. I'm grateful for Pallet, Kaiser Permanente, and others who are saying we want to be a part of the solution. And they're trying to eliminate homelessness, but they're trying to do it with people who have the same mission, have the same goal. City leaders rely on experts to give them and to provide them with ideas to reduce the homelessness, the crisis that we have in our communities every day. And today, we're all thrilled, whether you're in this room or virtually watching, to have some amazing leaders in America who understands, who work in this issue, who care, because I've gotten a chance to speak with many of them privately before this panel, and I was really moved by the commitment and passion and the things that motivate them to want to do this work. So first I'm gonna introduce Jeff Olivet, Executive Director of U.S. Housing Interagency Council on Homelessness. USICH is the only federal agency with the sole mission of preventing and ending homelessness in America. And then we have Bethany Hamilton, Executive Director at the National Center for Medical Legal Partnership, part of the Milken School of Public Health at George Washington University. They work to provide education, research, and technical assistance to help every health organization in the U.S. leverage legal services as a standard way to respond to social needs. And then we have Katrina Forrest, Co-Executive Director of City Health, who's a great partner of the National League of Cities. City Health is an initiative in the D. Beaumont Foundation and Kaiser Permanente that advocates and advances evidence-based policy solutions to help millions of people live longer and better lives, vibrant lives in communities all over America. And joining us remotely, we have Dr. Rishi Manchada, founder and CEO of Health Begins. Health Begins is a venue for frontline health practitioners to connect and share ideas that promote upstream change to advance health equity in communities. And in preparation for this panel, I came to my own conclusion that these are a group of remarkable leaders that are mission-driven, care, and passionate about helping us in America to address the issue of homelessness. So let's get this conversation started. And the first thing, Jeff and I, we called and coordinated our suit. So let's get that done and get it out of the way so that you guys don't wonder for the rest of this panel.
Clarence surprised me with the pink handkerchief there. He didn't tell me.
Yeah, I couldn't let you know everything. Yeah. Jeff, I'm going to start with you. USCICH released its strategic plan to prevent and end homelessness last December, which set a goal to reduce overall homelessness by 25% by 2025, based upon the 2022 levels. In this plan, how was USCHIC highlighted the importance of preventing homelessness within its broader strategy to end homelessness?
I'm really glad we're talking about prevention this afternoon. I got into homelessness about 30 years ago, and I've only been part of the Biden-Harris administration for the last 18 or 20 months. But when I got into this work, we were doing all emergency work. We were like at the bottom of that public health waterfall and just thinking about the crisis that was right in front of us. It was almost as if we had just built a bunch of emergency rooms, right? Homeless shelters, drop-in centers, outreach teams, just trying to keep people alive. And then I think we got better at the outflow part, better at housing and wraparound supports and really showing what can work. People often ask me, is it possible to end homelessness? And I absolutely believe down to my core that it's possible to end homelessness. And the reason I say that is because we have ended homelessness over and over and over in the 30 years that I've been in this work. What I mean by that is we're doing an amazing job at helping people exit homelessness, but we're doing it one person at a time, one family at a time. We are not solving the upstream systemic challenges that are creating homelessness in the first place. And so I've come to think about the solutions to homelessness in three parts: prevention, crisis response, and recovery. And the recovery part is really the housing and supportive services that keep people from falling back into homelessness. The piece that we've paid the least attention to is prevention. And unless we can figure that out, unless we can stem inflow into homelessness, we're going to keep bailing this bathtub for a very long time. So when we put out our plan, it had a very intentional upstream focus on pairing the emergency work that we're doing, the housing and services that providers are doing so well all over the country, with an upstream set of activities that make it possible for people never to become homeless in the first place.
I think that's a great way to start our conversation. It's not starting at the end, it's starting before it even gets there. And that's so important. Bethany, in your work, I mean, that's part of how you look at your work as well. At the National Center for Medical Legal Partnership, you're working to build an integrated healthcare system that addresses social needs that can impact health, like housing, by leveraging legal services. First, let me ask you this. Why is preventing evictions and increasing housing stability so important to the patient's health?
So, and thank you. Thanks everyone for inviting the lawyers to this conversation. Why is housing so important? I just want to take us back, as much as we may not want to go to the pandemic. And you recall, as we were trying to stave off COVID, keep those numbers under control, we also had a crisis that was exacerbated. It wasn't a new crisis, but it was a crisis that had been exacerbated, and that was the eviction crisis. The housing crisis has always existed. Speak to legal aid attorneys from around the country, from Maryland Legal Aid Bureau, all the way to Bay Area Legal Services, with whom we work, by the way, on this particular partnership with Kaiser Permanente and Health Begins. They knew, right, that this housing crisis had always existed and persisted. If you are homeless, what shelter are you supposed to stay in place at and quarantine? If you are threatened with eviction, you are not only suffering from the exacerbated chronic stress that we were all experiencing at that time, but now you have this threat of having to move to somewhere else along with your children, your family, and you may also at that time have been out of a job. So with what money are you going to fight the eviction, especially if you didn't have an attorney? Because in fact, 55 million low-income American households around the country don't have access to a lawyer. So what attorney is going to help you with that eviction? And then beyond that, what money are you going to find to be able to get into new housing? So we were trying to control COVID, and we were able to see that if you can control that legal situation, housing, right, shelter, if you can prevent people from losing their shelter, you could also fight the health crisis that we were seeing. we've known this, right? We always talk about the social drivers and determinants of health, and with the National Center for Medical Legal Partnership and practitioners who said, hey, we're going to we're going to break down the silos. Imagine a doctor throwing all of their tools from the medicine bag on the table, and the lawyer saying, hey, I'm going to put all of my stuff in my briefcase on this table. Let's break down the silos and figure out how we work together so that we can actually help our patients and clients in a more efficient way. From the very beginning, that's a preventative aspect, right? To find out what's the root cause of the problem that's systemically and symptomatically showing up as an eviction or unaffordable housing, and how can we continue to work together to create that systemic change in our clinical settings and continue to move way upstream to the policy level to actually address what is happening around the country, right? This is not just low-income folks. We're talking about middle-income folks who are at risk, and then keep going on and on. All of us are ultimately paying for it. So that's what medical legal partnership practitioners have been recognizing and continuing to get done, and the National Center supports them in building their capacity to get more of that done.
So, okay, so the question I'm going to ask is what kind of training are you providing and guidance? Because it sounds easy.
It's not.
Okay.
Lawyers and
right,
any clinician working together, it's not easy. Right. No, it's not easy.
So you guys probably figured out the panel's going to go wherever it's going to go today. So it sounds easy. So I need what are you guys to provide training and education to help me to do what you want us to do?
Yeah, the National Center for Medical Legal Partnership has been around since 2006, and the reason why it came into existence is because in Boston, Massachusetts, folks were finding out about this model where you got these otherwise perceived adversaries, lawyers and doctors, to actually work together. And that does take work, right? We're talking about actually understanding what you do across disciplines, not as adversaries, but how can you actually help this patient address their legal issues so that it effectuates improvements in their health? And then, right, how do you cross sectors and silos to actually exchange information so you know that health outcomes are actually coming about because of your partnership? This is not easy work at all. Excuse me, it's not easy work at all. You're really transforming and creating a cultural shift. We're still trying to get that done. There are about 500 around the country, but we know there are thousands more healthcare institutions. That's the potential that I see. It also, as we were talking in the speaker's room, I am motivated by anger. So I'm pretty furious at the folks who haven't done this. And we've been doing this. You can even look at the health center movement. You can look at the 90s, the HIV epidemic. We've been doing this for far too long for everyone to still not be there and be doing medical legal partnership.
And I'm going to continue along getting real technical help for city leaders, Katrina. City health, and I want to ask you, how are you guys advancing policies that increase support for tenants that live in communities? Because we need stable communities, but we need some policies as well. What are you guys doing?
Yeah, thank you for that question. And I think to situate more about what we do, it's helpful to give you an overview of how we work. So for those unfamiliar, City Health is a policy initiative. And what we've done is that we have curated a package of 12 evidence-based, upstream, health-promoting policies that we advance in the nation's largest 75 cities. Our entire policy package is designed to address the root causes of poor health. We know, obviously, housing and homelessness influence health outcomes. So when we were structuring our policy package, we wanted to acknowledge the magnitude of this issue. City leaders from Los Angeles to Tucson to Miami are grappling with iterations of the same housing challenges, right? Exorbitantly high costs, a severe shortage of affordable housing in the country, so on and so forth. So we wanted to take a comprehensive approach, and 3 of our 12 policies are housing specific. And our goal was to really try to address the 3 Ps of production, preservation, and protection. So our production policy is affordable housing trusts. These are flexibly designed local funds that can address myriad housing challenges. Everything from financing the production of new housing units, funding the preservation and maintenance of existing affordable housing stock, also incentives and benefits like homeownership incentives and emergency rental assistance. Our preservation policy is healthy rental housing. And for us, that is about proactive rental inspections. Far too often in this country, when tenants are facing abject conditions in their housing units, their only recourse for remediation is to file a complaint. The downside to that is that often they fear retaliation or some other discrimination when they file that complaint. PRI policies shift the burden from tenants to the government and makes clear that the government has an affirmative obligation to know where their rental inventory is across the city, and also that they are regularly and proactively inspecting it to make sure that there are no health and safety or other housing code violations. Our final P is protection. And for us, this is our legal support for renters policy. It is really about the codification of a right to counsel. Bethany just very eloquently articulated the urgency around eviction and why legal support is critical. For us, we believe this is a proven intervention because we know that when tenants have access to legal counsel, they are more likely to remain stably housed, they are less likely to rely on homeless shelters, and if they want to move, they are able to have more time to do that and also do it in a manner that preserves their long-term housing stability. So that is a little bit about how we are approaching housing. And yeah.
Well, thank you for that. I appreciate that because that's, I mean, the 12, what did you call it?
Our 12 policies, our
12
policy
policies.
package.
I think that's very helpful. And I think that a lot of municipal leaders talk about it, but to be able to have policies specifically to address it comprehensively, homelessness comprehensively, would be very helpful. Let me go to our virtual guest, Rishi. Thank you so much for being here. And you founded Health Begins in 2012 because you saw the need to strengthen the work that clinicians and community partners were doing to improve conditions that made people sick in the first place. How does your team help leaders and frontline caregivers move upstream? And again, starting at the prevention that Jeff talked about to improve their lives. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. Sorry to Clarence and Jeff for missing the memo on the suit. I'll work on that. It's a pleasure to be with you guys today, even remotely. Really just to kind of pick up on the conversation around the need to prevent homelessness and the understanding of the ways in which access to justice and legal aid is a critical lever in that strategy. There's also, as we know, across cities in the country, increasing demands for equity, including healthcare equity. And as part of that, increasing demands to integrate healthcare and social services as well, to be able to improve outcomes for our patients, our community members, our residents. And what we at Health Begins have been doing now for a number of years is, as a national mission-driven firm that focuses on strategies and implementation, we've really focused in on helping Medicaid health plans, health systems, as well as social sector clients, community-based organizations, and national partners, to not only exceed some of the growing performance requirements for healthcare equity and to address patients' social needs, but to do so in a way that achieves long-term impact for people and community who have been harmed by societal practices. We've had the privilege of working across 29 states last year, and by the end of 2025, we're hoping to expand across the country, helping 250 communities to be able to advance health equity. So when I talk about long-term impact, though, I just want to underscore this point, if I may. What does long-term impact for people and communities harmed by societal practices mean? Well, for us at Health Begins, working in partnership, for example, with Kaiser Permanente and the National Center for Medical Legal Partnerships, in that project, as with other projects, when we do this work with health plans, with health systems, and with social sector partners, including legal aid, we know it's important to apply a public health and a structural analysis to this work, but to understand what drives inequities, and then to translate that understanding into concrete strategies that work across levels. So across levels meaning, how do we improve equity and advance our care within our practices and in our healthcare systems? How do we transform our institutions? How do we transform the relationships and strengthen the ecosystem that allows our institutions to collaborate across sectors? And then finally, of course, how do we work at the structural level to be able to transform and reform policies? This project that we've had a chance to work on for a couple of years now with the National Center for Medical Legal Partnership, as well as with Kaiser Permanente, the Health, Housing, and Justice Initiative, as it's named, is a perfect example of what it means to implement a multi-level strategy, right? It's, in this case, it's an example of how to bring different sectors together: healthcare, legal aid, doctors and lawyers who you not otherwise think about being in the same room, let alone the same kind of initiative, bringing together disparate stakeholders to be able to prevent homelessness, in this case, by increasing access to justice. And for me, as a physician, I'll just say, one who's privileged to be part of a growing network of those in healthcare who understand the need to actually move upstream to advance equity. It's one really powerful example of what it's like to be able to increase our impact in each of our professions by working in what you might describe as a multi-solver kind of initiative. This is a way in which different sectors can come together all around, in this case, preventing homelessness, and solving some of the problems and the challenges that we're experiencing in our own sectors by working together.
You know, as I was listening to you, I started thinking about connecting two of the panels in a way around the legal connection and the need to make sure that medical legal partnerships are important to preventing this. How are you making that connection to the work that Bethany talked about a little bit earlier?
Well, I think it's certainly Bethany and the team at the National Center for Medical Legal Partnerships represent the forefront of what and the vanguard really in the country about what it's like to create these partnerships of medical centers, healthcare professionals with legal aid. And so we've had the privilege for a number of years working with the National Center. Our colleagues, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention Ellen Lawton, who's a major a vanguard, a pioneer in this space as well. And the work that Ellen and the rest of our team in partnership with Bethany and of course the team at Kaiser has been working on hand in glove for a few years now really has meant helping in many different parts of the Kaiser Permanente footprint across the country, helping these medical center leaders, legal aid organizations break bread, come together and say, what is it that brings us together? What can we do together to be able to identify those at risk of homelessness, at risk of eviction, and how they show up in the clinics and the practices? How can we identify, and when we identify those, connect them to the appropriate services in the community, to legal aid in this case? And what we're seeing is that it's not easy, but after a lot of really hard work that everybody's been putting in, these frontline partnerships are already demonstrating remarkable improvements in being able to help real people, individuals, constituents in different cities start to actually get an approximation of what not just better healthcare looks like, but what justice can feel like. And that's why I treasure our partnership with Bethany and Kaiser on this.
Mutual, Rishi.
Well, thank you for sharing that. And one of the areas, Jeff, I want to bring you back in, that I get a lot of calls from local leaders, mayors around America, is transition back into community after serving time in a correctional facility, especially young citizens that live in our communities. And I'd be interested, because I read something about what work you guys are doing in that space at USICH. Can you talk about some of the prevention priorities that you're doing to help those returning that want to come back after they've served their time to be viable residents, but have challenges getting back into communities?
I think there are a couple of ways to think about prevention. One is very targeted approaches that zero in on specific populations that are at risk of homelessness. Another is universal strategies that apply to a whole population. And just to tie our conversation back to the mayor's panel a few minutes ago, we heard from Mayor Steinberg and from Mayor Go the importance of both and thinking, right? We can't get locked into this mindset of either it's a housing problem or a mental health problem. It's either we focus on the crisis in front of us or we go upstream and do prevention work. We have to broaden our thinking to be both and. And so I want to come back to that around targeted prevention approaches and universal prevention approaches. On the group that you asked about, which is people who have done their time in jail and prison and are now coming back into community, they are at incredible risk of homelessness. We know that something like 50,000 people a year re-enter from criminal justice, criminal legal systems into homeless shelters, encampments, under bridges. What an incredible lost opportunity for intervening, for providing housing, for providing wraparound support, reconnection to employment, reconnection to family and friends and faith communities. And if we can zero in on that moment of transition and then the upstream weeks before that, get housing in place, get job opportunities in place, get the social supports in place so that people don't end up homeless, it's going to be better not only for that individual, but for the entire community. The same is true with young people aging out of foster care. Maybe they were involved in juvenile justice, maybe they've just aged out. Something like 1 in 4 young people who have aged out of foster care become homeless by the time they're 21. We know who that group is. It's a finite group of people, and we have missed the opportunity to keep them from being homeless. And if we don't get them housed quickly or prevent them from becoming homeless in the first place, we're creating a cycle of homelessness that's going to last for decades for many of those young people. So those are critical points of intervention, and we've got strategies in our plan that address those. Just a brief word on the more universal. I think the pandemic interventions showed that universal strategies work. We've heard a couple of people talk about emergency rental assistance today. I think the expansion of the child tax credit. These showed that you can actually prevent homelessness at a population level. And if you look at the HUD numbers from 2020 to 2022, the point in time count actually flattened off. It didn't explode into a lot of new homelessness like many of us were predicting. And that was because we intervened. It's because we put money into communities to keep people housed. We know those strategies work. And I agree with Mayor Steinberg earlier around the incredible lost opportunity around the housing and homelessness work in Build Back Better. And I think we need to revive that legislation and get it passed.
So I want to ask each of the panelists to think about the next frontier, the next opportunity. You know, oftentimes we have to figure out what's going to keep us working hard on this issue that we all need to work on as partners. And so I was thinking about the question of what type of strategies do you think we need to implement in America to prevent homelessness? And what types of policies at each level do you think we would need to implement to achieve some success, our goal, that is all of us working? I'm going to go virtually first, Rishi, with you and ask you to share with us first, and then we'll go to Bethany, Katrina, and then Jeff.
Appreciate it. Yeah, thank you. You know, when it comes to what I can speak to perhaps most directly is what physicians and healthcare providers can do as we look at this next frontier. And, you know, I think it's important to understand that it's not just about one role, like either I can do this or I can't. When we think about physicians, this is where a multi-level approach can be really helpful, as we found in working with physicians, other clinicians, and healthcare professionals across the country. There's sometimes in the healthcare space, when it comes to these questions about upstream challenges, including homelessness, you hear the debate framed as, well, it's not our job, right? It's to prevent homelessness. It's somebody else's job. Why are you asking us to do it? We have enough on our plate, et cetera. One thing that we really reinforce is that, like most things in healthcare, it's about knowing where and how to lead, partner, and support. It's a team effort. And so, for example, with a multi-level understanding, we can lead efforts in our clinics and our practices in healthcare to be able to integrate health care and legal aid in the way that the medical legal partnerships model provides. But in our institutions, even in our healthcare systems, we can drive transformation and increase awareness about the importance of access to legal aid and to justice, as well as, of course, access to affordable housing and how it impacts health, so that healthcare can now be part of the constituency in our institutions. We can partner in their communities with legal aid and others to be able to create a more just, equitable ecosystem to get people homes and be able to stay in them. And then finally, at the structural level, healthcare has a role to play in supporting efforts to replace the policies that put people in harm's way in the first place, that put them on the streets rather than keeping them in their homes. I think for policymakers, especially given the incredible audience that's here today, I think it's important to remember how hard this work is as we look at the frontiers, to remember the incredible opportunity that also exists, especially for policymakers, to invest in and help accelerate the efforts like the ones we're talking about today. So, for example, I'd love to see cities and mayors continue to be really active in the way that today's conversations already have exemplified. For example, active as conveners in bringing more health systems and legal aid partners together, along with the broader stakeholders to prevent homelessness, as barrier busters and policy leaders, really helping to clear the path to accelerate cross-sector work to increase access to health, housing, and justice. And finally, I'd even like to see mayors and legislators and policymakers engage in the friendly competition, building on City Health's great model that Katrina does. Wouldn't it be great to see cities race to get the gold policy medal for homelessness prevention and increasing access to legal aid in their cities? I think there's a lot of opportunities to be able to not just for healthcare to apply a multi-level approach, but for us also to help support the ways in which cities and mayors lead the way.
Thank you. And you've given me an idea. Now I'm designating, if you were mayor, Hamilton, Mayor Hamilton,
yeah,
you got mad because this issue is in your community and you need help. What would you do to solve this? What steps would you, Mayor Hamilton?
Number one, I'm all about gratitude. Thank you to the healthcare community. Also, thank you to legal aid for saving us day in and day out through the pandemic and before then. So number one, if I were mayor, I would issue a proclamation and using the competitive approach, challenge others to recognize medical legal partnership and legal aid providers in every single city around the United States. Two different communities, right? Legal aid and those who engage in medical legal partnerships, right? Just make it a day of recognition, at least say thank you, legal aid, for doing all that you did to also save our lives during the pandemic, which leads to my second point, save our lives. Legal aid, lawyers, saving lives. I view legal care as healthcare. And I would like to see also some of those proclamations, and you can do this at the state level, right, where you finally say civil legal aid, that community that we've so long ignored, muted, made invisible. We know public defense, but civil legal aid, right? Let's bring them out from behind the shadows and recognize civil legal aid as a public health intervention. If there's one takeaway, I'm not running for mayor of any city anytime soon, unless apparently I'm asked 11 times as a woman. However, one takeaway that I hope everyone in the audience leaves with today is let's shift the entire paradigm and start viewing and declaring that civil legal aid is a public health intervention. That's what I would do if I were mayor.
Thank you, Mayor Hamilton. Mayor Forrest.
Mayor Forrest is actually going to take a personal point of privilege and answer the question that you asked previously.
Okay.
That's my first task as mayor.
Okay.
No, just in thinking about the frontier and the strategies, my purview is cities, and I do think it's useful to situate what I'm seeing cities doing and what I think will continue. One of the things that we're starting to see cities do is really look critically at their zoning and land use laws. I think about cities like Minneapolis that eliminated single-family zoning, with the idea being let's increase density, build more affordable housing, scatter it all across the city so that we're not concentrating affordable housing and poverty in certain pockets of the city. I think things like that will continue. I also think about where we are right now in Washington, D.C., and there are a number of other cities that are also looking at the possibility of taking and converting vacant office space into affordable housing or homeless shelters or permanent supportive housing. I think that work will continue. As we heard a little bit in the video, and this is not just specific to housing and homelessness, but I think a number of cities are starting to look deeply and trying to understand the role of racism in propping up systems and how it is embedded into policy and the inimical effect that it continues to have for low-income people of color that it's keeping disadvantaged. I think all of that will continue. I also want to pick up on a thread of something that Jeff said, because I feel like when we talk about homelessness, we often talk about it as principally an affordable housing problem. And I think that is true. However, we know that it's multifactorial. Things like low wages, unemployment, underemployment, foreclosure, eviction, which we've just been talking about, but also mental health and substance use disorders all contribute to homelessness. And I think we have to have policies in place that are addressing each of those things simultaneously. I will say from the city perspective, they are under the weight of convergent crises. There is a housing and homelessness crisis, a mental health crisis, an opioid crisis. And I think we all have an obligation in this room to provide them with the tools, the policies, the resources, and political cover to tackle these issues in a way that we can make a meaningful dent in the problem of homelessness.
Wow. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you.
You're welcome. No, the way in which you framed it, I'm sure the mayors that are in this room that are listening to what you just said is really key to looking at this comprehensively, not just one size fits all. Mayor Olivet?
Mayor Jeff Olivet is a phrase you will never hear. Unless my long-lost second cousin, Jeff Olivet, decides to run. There is one, actually. There's a long-lost. The first thing I'd like to say on this is that homelessness is not a partisan issue. It has become a political football. It's become a political lightning rod. It's become weaponized. There's no room for that. We have a life and death crisis going on. The thing I admire about mayors is the pragmatism, the getting stuff done mindset. And I see that cut across party, across partisan affiliation. We have got to figure out how to come together across party lines on this at the local, state, and federal level. Got a long way to go at the federal level on that, but I do see real bright spots at the local level. Around how that applies to prevention, I really think we can find common ground on this. It's the smart thing to do, it's the humane thing to do, it's the cost-effective thing to do. There are a lot of ways we can talk about that. When I joined the Biden-Harris administration last year, a lot of our initial conversation was around how we advance racial equity in our homelessness response and how we go upstream and focus on prevention. And these have been two historic blind spots in our national discourse around homelessness. It wasn't until just the last few years that we've really been having a discourse about the racial inequity in homelessness. Prevention has been, I think, rarely part of our conversation historically. And I think I thought of those as two priorities the administration should take on. And I have become convinced that it's one priority, that if we can do homelessness prevention, we are also moving towards racial justice. If we focus on the reentry of people who have been in jails and prisons, youth aging out of foster care, 9 out of 10 are young people of color, eviction prevention disproportionately helps communities of color. If we do good prevention, we are doing the work of racial equity.
And Mayor Mashanda, I want to make sure I give you that opportunity as well. I know you've been wanting to run for public office to solve this issue. So, Rishi, what are your thoughts if you were
proud to announce my campaign starting today? Apparently, I really appreciate actually the prior comments in all seriousness from the other mayors elect on the panel. What occurs to me as I was listening to this panel and this really rich conversation today is first to pick up on Jeff's last point there, the power of mayors as pragmatic kind of leaders, and also the power of stories. The videos that started this session, for example, tell us and show us how important it is to surface the stories of both individuals most impacted by, in this case, homelessness, and also the ways in which those stories allow us to see and maintain kind of hope at times when issues like including homelessness can get can turn into partisan kind of issues, where in fact we know as we get close to this work, there are concrete practical solutions that allow different partners that you may not think sometimes work together, like those in the social sector, those in healthcare, and those in legal aid. There are stories that abound in our communities, in our cities right now. And as I know many of the mayors in the room know, the more we're able to tap into those stories and elevate those stories, not only does it help pave the way for those innovators and those frontline change makers to get the energy they need to continue that work, but it also helps to push away sometimes the noise that can make the policy environment less conducive to the very supports we need, right? We need the stories of what it means to actually prevent homelessness in order to make sure that people understand, to Katrina's point, it's not just about lack of access to affordable housing. This is also about lack of access to justice and lack of access to healthcare and lack of access to the very things that we would all want for our neighbors. The more we can humanize using stories, this process, I think the more we can engender more support. And that starts, frankly, from at the city level with mayors leading the way.
You know, in preparation of or discussing the need for this panel, had a chance to have a conversation with Amy, CEO of Pallet, and telling her when I was mayor of a story. It was a story of a young kid, but mostly a man who had a family of 6 kids. Every Saturday morning, his kids would wake up and walk outside, and there was their dad drunk because he had gotten paid on Friday. And he would drink and couldn't come inside the house. And that happened for years. And then there's this kid that he told the story that that one Saturday morning he walked out there and his dad wasn't there. And three years later, he was driving down the street and there was his dad with a a grocery cart with bags in it. And his dad had become homeless. He hadn't seen his dad for years. He became very active, became president of the student body. Dad didn't show up to graduation, college, all of those things. And eventually, this young man returned home and became mayor of his city. And he saw his dad again almost weekly in the laundromat. He'd stop and visit him, get him services, got him an apartment, but he still went back. The alcohol, the drugs, he just could not. He had a loving family, but could not save his dad. That person was me. And it is a thing that impacts families in a way that you just do not understand. It's also a point of a struggle because especially when you're in a public role, you're out there saving everyone else, but you can't. But the last great light was my sister got married and he came, we dressed him up. He was looking so handsome at that time. And again, put him in an apartment, just could not bring the comprehensive services that he needed in order to rebound. I tell you that story, and it's not easy to tell that story to you all because I don't talk about it often. Because first of all, it hurts. It takes forgiveness as a kid because if you carry that around with you, you will never be able to help others to understand the impact it has. We have a lot of work to do in America. You know, a lot of it is mental because I think as a black man, my dad didn't feel like he was respected at work, especially rural America, where he worked in the celery fields, the sugarcane fields, and was demeaned as a man, watching other people provide for his family. So one size does not fit all in regards to helping, but we have to remain committed to this. We have to recognize that the whole family needs help, not just that individual. And we have to recognize that let's put a face on everybody that we see and see if there's a way that we can do our part in our position, whether it's mayor, whether it's co-executives of associations, whether it's the private sector partners that we have here. I really do think that if we keep our eye on the ball that we can end homelessness in America. And I want to thank you all for all that you're doing. If you're in this room, thank you. If you're virtual, thank you. And I want to beg you not to give up because we all need you. Thank you all for having us today. I appreciate it.
I just want to thank Clarence and the previous panel for that very informative conversation. And thank you, Clarence, for sharing that moving personal story. In case you're wondering, my name is Dennis Shea. I'm the Executive Director of the Terwilliger Center for Housing Policy here at BPC. And it's my pleasure to introduce two individuals who have spent much of their careers promoting the deep connection between health and housing. Dr. Richard Cho is a Senior Advisor for Housing and Services to HUD Secretary Marcia Fudge. In this role, he advises the Secretary and helps set HUD policy strategy for solving homelessness, coordinating health with housing, and meeting the housing needs of people with disabilities, older adults, and people involved in the criminal justice system. And in a past life, Richard served as Deputy Director of the U.S. Interagency Council on Homelessness. Dr. Tisa Marie Sherry is the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Planning and Evaluation at the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, and ASPE is where all the smart people congregate at HHS. That's what I'm told, at least. But Dr. Sherry is a health economist and general internist whose research has investigated healthcare delivery, financing, and policy strategies to improve the health and economic status of adults with chronic medical conditions. So we don't have any mayors or lawyers in this panel, but we do have two doctors. And they are here to discuss how HHS and HUD are coordinating their support programs to address homelessness, as well as new opportunities to strengthen their collaboration. So I'm just going to turn it over to you both and let us know what you're up to and what can we expect.
Great. Well, I'll start us off. Thank you so much, Dennis, for that introduction. And I want to thank the Bipartisan Policy Center and mayors and CEOs for U.S. Housing Investment and also the Kaiser Permanente for putting this really fantastic event together. And by the way, Clarence's story just says it all. It's really tough to follow that. But I think all of the policy wonky stuff that Tisa Marie and I are going to talk about kind of pales in comparison to that personal story that Clarence shared. So I want to thank Clarence for that. As Dennis mentioned, my role is to advise Secretary Fudge at HUD on two things. One is what HUD's role is to help address the crisis of homelessness in this country and to contribute to the broader administration efforts to address homelessness. And second, it's really about how we can connect housing and healthcare and supportive services to advance that goal as well as meet the needs of other vulnerable Americans. Now, with respect to that first of my two roles, HUD has done quite a bit over the last 2.5 years to provide housing resources, and it's been really just an incredible effort that I'm very proud of the amount of resources that have been provided. You heard Mayor Richardson talk about the emergency housing vouchers that we awarded. These are 70,000 vouchers. For the first time ever, vouchers specifically targeted at people experiencing homelessness. We provided $5 billion in grants to help communities build more permanent supportive housing, as well as provide short-term rental assistance and other supportive services. And we continue to provide more resources to communities to help them address the housing side of the homelessness situation. But as you heard, and I think this has been a really great event highlighting that homelessness is not only a housing issue, it's also about supportive services. And I think the fact that the Secretary has a small number of senior advisors around her and that one of those positions is to just focus on how we can connect the dots between housing and healthcare demonstrates that from HUD's perspective, how we can solve homelessness is about how we coordinate housing and supportive services. Many people have criticized the housing first approach, saying that housing first doesn't work because people also need services. And that's just such a difficult phrase for me to hear when, from my perspective, housing first has always been about how we can provide the combination of housing and supports so that we could address homelessness. But let's be clear that the services that people need must first and foremost be about how we can help people find housing, maintain their housing, and then use that housing as a platform to achieve all their other goals, whether it's recovery from addiction or mental health needs, finding employment, reconnecting with family members, and what have you. Again, the kind of conditions that people experiencing homelessness have are chronic conditions. And so what you need for chronic conditions are long-term services and supports that stick with people and actually provide services in and around people's homes. These are not acute conditions, and short-term hospitalizations and short-term treatment are only going to fix acute needs. What we really need is ongoing supportive services. So a lot of my work has really been about how not only what HUD can do in terms of the resources we provide, but how we can actually direct people to HHS, where a lot of the resources live. Now, we do our best to provide some supportive services in conjunction with our housing programs. With respect to the roughly $3 billion that we provide just in homeless assistance resources, actually 27% of those resources annually goes to pay for supportive services. That's $880 million a year. And a lot of communities are using those dollars to provide case management and peer recovery supports, such as what Mayor Go mentioned earlier today. But again, if you think about trying to use HUD dollars to pay for supportive services, there's a lot of challenges with that. There's a trade-off. Any dollars that HUD uses for supportive services is money we're taking away from rental assistance and from actually housing needs. Secondarily, if anybody understands our homeless assistance grants, these are annual grants. They must be renewed on an annual basis, and communities have to apply every year to renew those grants. Now, really hard to pay for good clinical case management salaries when you're not even sure if you're going to have resources from one year to the next. And so it's really critical that we find more sustainable and stable ways to pay for supportive services. Now, that's where HHS, I think, comes into play, that really, if you take all of HUD's budget, you could actually fit it within just one of the budgets of HHS's many agencies. We are that much smaller than HHS. And if you look at $880 million that we spend in homeless assistance grants for wraparound supportive services, that's it's a rounding error when you think about Medicaid, for example, which is $700 billion or so in annual spending. So if you even take 5% of $700 billion, that's still many more billions of dollars than we can ever afford to pay for in supportive services. And so much of the work that I've been doing over the last 2.5 years is to work really closely with HHS leaders such as Dr. Sherry, who has just really been a fantastic partner in HUD's work to help communities leverage the programs that already exist within HHS. And so with that, I'll turn over to you.
Thank you so much. And hello, everybody. It's wonderful to be here. I also want to thank our hosts for putting on this wonderful event. My name is Tisa Sherry. I am the Deputy Assistant Secretary in our Office of the Assistant Secretary for Planning and Evaluation at HHS, or ASPE for short. ASPE's role, for those who aren't familiar with us, is to conduct policy research. We are also the principal advisor to the Secretary of HHS on policy development. And then, because as Richard alluded to, HHS is a big department, we also have the privilege of getting to coordinate major initiatives and activities that cross our entire department. And one of those that my Office of Behavioral Health, Disability, and Aging Policy is really privileged to get to work on is helping to coordinate the substantial investments that HHS is making in our services, policies, and programs to try to meet the needs of people who are at risk of homelessness and also experiencing homelessness. And in that role also, we have the privilege of getting to collaborate with our partners at HUD and also at the U.S. Interagency Council on Homelessness. To pick up on the points that Richard raised about how can HHS be part of the solution here, I think the great news is that there are many ways that we can be and that we are and are really driving towards this. I think Richard put it beautifully in that we recognize that the priority for people who are experiencing homelessness has to be to make sure that we connect them with affordable permanent housing. But we also recognize that many of those people have chronic health conditions and that they may need supportive services to help them maintain and stay in that housing. There are a number of ways in which we are trying to leverage our programs to help provide those services and supports. To the point of sustainability, our public insurance programs are a really important lever and vehicle here, and in particular Medicaid. So as many of you may know, Medicaid, through a range of authorities, can actually provide federal matching funds for a range of housing-related services and supports. And in a 2021 state health official letter, our colleagues at the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services clarified a number of these. These can include home modifications. They can include one-time assistance for people who need to transition from an institution or congregate setting, which could include a homeless shelter, to a private residence. Things like security deposits, assistance with activating utilities, for example. And then also Medicaid can reimburse for a number of both pre and post-tenancy support services, including but not limited to case management and care coordination services to ensure that people can access the critical health services that allow them to remain stably housed. In addition to this, what has been really exciting to see in recent years is a number of states that have been leveraging Medicaid 1115 demonstration opportunities to test and build on and innovate new ways to help effectively address these health-related social needs. We've heard earlier this morning about California's CalAIM initiative, for example. Last year, CMS approved demonstration requests from Arizona, Oregon, Arkansas, and also Massachusetts to test innovative ways of addressing housing insecurity. And notably, in Arizona and Oregon, this also included approval for up to 6 months of rental assistance. We also earlier today heard about, from my colleague Jeff Olivet, about the critical opportunity that the reentry transition presents for people who have been incarcerated and are returning to the community. This is another area in which I'm really excited to highlight some work that our Medicaid program has advanced just in this past year. So in April, they announced a new demonstration opportunity in which states, if approved, can receive federal matching funds for up to 90 days of pre-release services for people who are currently incarcerated and will be transitioning into the community. Now, why is this so important? Really, this comes down to a homelessness prevention intervention in many ways when you think about it. In the California, statewide study on homelessness, which was released by UCSF earlier this year, some of the findings on the frequency with which people who are homeless are involved in the criminal and justice system were staggering. 79% of people surveyed in that study had had some involvement in their lifetime, 20 to 30% in the previous 6 months before they were surveyed. And yet, among people who are currently experiencing homelessness and who had exited from a prison or jail, fewer than 20% received any assistance with identifying housing services and supports or a whole range of other benefits. And the Reentry 1115 opportunity really aims to change that. So that is one other critical source of support that we think will be very important. Now, obviously, Medicaid is a really important resource, but I also wouldn't overlook Medicare and Medicare's role in this as well. It's estimated that anywhere from 7 to 10% of people who are currently experiencing homelessness are age 65 or older, and unfortunately, current trends suggest that that percentage will grow over time. In addition, Medicare plays an incredibly important role for people under 65 who receive benefits through Social Security disability insurance, also a population, unfortunately, at elevated risk of experiencing homelessness. And through our Medicare program, there have been a number of policy changes announced recently to try to facilitate the efforts of healthcare providers and healthcare delivery organizations to more effectively assess for people's housing-related needs and also connect them with the services by ensuring that they can be paid for them. And one example is that for next year's 2024 physician fee schedule, there's currently a proposal out which will be finalized in the coming months, which proposes to establish new billing codes that would allow not just physicians, but a broader range of healthcare providers, including navigators, community health workers, peer specialists, to receive reimbursement for delivering these critical services and making these connections. Of course, our grant programs also play an important role here, and I want to just briefly highlight that for our Substance Use and Mental Health Services Administration, SAMHSA, they recently published a really incredible resource on how their block grant dollars in the mental health and substance use block grants can be used to fund the full spectrum of recovery services and supports, which includes housing-related services and supports. And finally, in putting all of these financing mechanisms in place, what we're really trying to do is set up a system where we can drive towards and support more comprehensive integrated models of care delivery. And so that's really the ultimate goal. And given the really disproportionate burden of behavioral health conditions among people experiencing homelessness, I think one example and one opportunity I always like to highlight of how we can effectively do this is the joint SAMHSA-CMS Certified Community Behavioral Health Clinic model, which, thanks to the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act, is now being scaled up to additional states. The CCBHC model, as many of you may know, provides not only comprehensive behavioral health care services, but also participating clinics are required to assess for health-related social needs, provide case management services to help connect people to relevant services and supports. And in addition, what we're so excited to see is that a number of states are expressing an interest in even going above and beyond the federal certification standards that we have in place to see how they can set their own standards that even raise the bar even higher for how CCBHCs serve people experiencing and at risk of homelessness. So I think the good news is that there's a lot that we can bring to bear and are excited to bring to bear to work collaboratively to address this issue.
So what I just want to share, I think, just to emphasize Tisa's point that communities actually have the building blocks to connect housing and supportive services. I've been working in the field of addressing homelessness for over 20 years, and for most of those 20 years, most communities complained that they did not have enough housing resources to provide assistance. These days, that's not what we hear from communities. In fact, they say we actually have more vouchers than we can actually lease at this point. The challenges are really finding the supportive services, and I try to remind them that of all the opportunities that Tisa just mentioned. Now, between the continuum of care grants, vouchers, capital dollars that HUD has provided, and Medicaid, the SAMHSA grants, and the Certified Community Behavioral Health Centers, communities have these building blocks. But it's a little like we've given communities a bunch of Lego pieces and then told them to build a Millennium Falcon, but we didn't give them instruction manual. So it's really difficult on how to put the Millennium Falcon together if you don't have the instruction manual. And so one of the things that HUD has done, along with HHS, is to create some new kind of tools and resources to help communities connect the dots and understand how you can make these two sets of programs from HHS and HUD work together. In December of 2021, we launched something called the HHS and HUD Housing and Services Resource Center. Actually, we have some of the staff who run that center from ACL here with us today. But that resource center was supposed to be a one-stop shopping for information on how you can actually understand what resources are out there for supportive services and for housing, and how you can actually connect the dots for people who are homeless, at risk of homelessness, people with disabilities, and older adults. And I'm also pleased to share that our latest endeavor through this Housing and Services Resource Center is that very soon HUD and HHS will be launching a new technical assistance effort to help states that have already received approvals of their Medicaid waivers and have other Medicaid authorities that cover housing-related services and to coordinate those with HUD programs. And we will be issuing a competitive application for states who have approved Medicaid authorities that cover these services on how they can actually connect the dots and improve and support their implementation. We heard a lot about CalAIM. CalAIM was approved back in, I think, 2020 with a lot of fanfare, and then, of course, the pandemic happened and implementation slowed. We need to really accelerate the pace of implementation for states that have, the growing number of states that have approved Medicaid authorities that can cover these supportive services. And so
that's news, folks. That's news. Right? That's news. So I just want to thank you both for sharing this information with us. And it's great to see HUD and HHS working together, which is something that we have advocated here at BPC. And, BPC has its own doctor. And that's who I'm going to ask to come to the stage, Dr. Anam Parekh, to close this out. We'll see.
Dennis, thank you. Richard, Tessmarie, thank you so much. I'm going to be very brief because I know that we're a little bit over time today, but I just want to acknowledge, wow, this was a terrific, terrific program. So thank you, really, everyone. I spent many years taking care of patients and in the process developing care plans for them. But I often took for granted that if they had unstable or even no housing, none of what I did really mattered. That care plan was just not going to be implemented. And so I think what we've really heard today, that housing is fundamental, it is foundational to health. Everyone deserves the opportunity that comes with a safe, stable, affordable home, and we need to continue to push forward to reaching that goal. We need to destigmatize who is homeless, why they're homeless, and as Mayor Williams said, I think very profoundly, homelessness is not a crime. At BPC, we believe that there's a real opportunity to achieve a bipartisan consensus on potential solutions to the homelessness crisis specifically. And I think the first panel today especially demonstrated what is potentially possible. As Mayor Steinberg said, that it's important on this one issue that we don't drift to the polls. So at this point, I want to just please thank all of the speakers who participated in today's program. Let's give them a big round of applause. Let's also once again thank our partners, Kaiser Permanente, as well as the mayors and CEOs for U.S. Housing Investment. I want to thank our virtual audience, everyone in the room who is here in person. I'll also ask everyone to please take a moment to take the event survey. It only takes 2 minutes. It's enormously helpful to us as we continue to improve these events. I think there'll be a QR code on the screen any moment, or there will be in a second. And with that, I'd like to invite everybody to join us for the reception. Thank you again. Wonderful program. Thank you.